Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kids and cadets, to another riveting edition of Totally Nonsense. I'm your host, Brandon Scott Ellis, Hebrew name Shmuel Menach, on the other side of Long Island, recording from his own little comfortable basement where he hides from civilization. Who do we have right here as the other host of Nonsense News Nation?
Well, hello, fans of Nonsense News Nation. I am Scott Honickman, and Brandon and I are on opposite sides of the island, but we are still talking together as if we are right next to each other. Isn't that crazy?
Exactly. Quarantine may be able to break our physical boundaries, but it cannot. Spirits, the podcast continues. Special treat, we're going to skip away from the usual format of the show because during quarantine I spent 23 wonderful days watching every single Marvel movie, each movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, from Iron Man all the way to Spider-Man Far From Home. It's 23 movies, and I decided, I spoke to Scott and I said, hey, let's rank these. We've got nothing else better to do.
Right, and originally what we were going to do is we were just going to make a regular podcast, rank the videos, talk about them, but I had the idea of why not pull up on tiermaker.com the official Marvel movie tier list and we'll rank them here. And like Brandon said, he just watched all of them again. He's seen each movie multiple times. Some of these movies I've seen multiple times. Some of these I've never seen, like the Hulk. I think that's the only one I haven't seen actually. Maybe Thor: The Dark World too, but I might as well never seen it. I don't remember it at
Oh,
all.
we'll get to that. We'll get to all of these. Don't
Right.
worry. If you don't have an opinion, I'll have an opinion for you. So everything's well constructed. It's going to be a lot of fun. So for the people on YouTube, you can see a nice little video that Scott's going to put together. For the people who treat it like a podcast and are listening on Spotify or TuneIn or whatever, SoundCloud, I'm sorry, it's just going to be audio. But we'll try to make it interesting with our wonderful radio voices. So is that cool? Is that cool, Scott? Is that
Brandon,
cool, boys and girls?
we are we are gods amongst men when it comes to audio visual stuff. I'm just kidding. I want to be humble about this, but
I mean, I have a degree for it, so I'm not going to brag.
okay. On
Anyway, I
Brandon's
digress.
screen, he's got the tier list. On my screen, I've got the tier list. I will be, as you say, ranking them for our video here. And you want to just get right into it?
Let's get right into it. We on my list, it may be different from what Scott has. We start out with mediocre, we move up to decent, then good, then really good, then great, then God tier. But we're gonna start with mediocre. No movie in the Marvel lineup is necessarily bad or extremely broken. But there's one movie that comes to mind, to most Marvel fans' mind, when they think, oh, when they hear that noise, one character comes to mind, and that is Thor in his film Thor: The Dark World. So congratulations, Thor: The Dark World. You have made it to mediocre.
Okay, let me
You're
go
the
ahead.
only film that takes that place. Scott, put that mediocre movie in
I
its
did.
place. For anyone who
Yeah.
doesn't have eyes, ears, or any common sense, we're going to explain to you why Thor: The Dark World is, in fact, the most mediocre. Now, Thor, people say, initially wasn't the most interesting Avenger, but he had some character in his first movie, and especially in Avengers. But for some reason, I don't know who directed the film for Thor: The Dark World. It could have been Hank from Ed, and Eddie, the little piece of wood who directed Thor to be a piece of wood. He wasn't interesting. His character went absolutely nowhere. Loki was in it, so it definitely boosted it up like maybe a smidge, maybe a few inches. Otherwise, they got Christopher Eccleston to be the villain, a dark elf who was literally one of the doctors from Doctor Who, and they did nothing with him. They did nothing with this movie, and it did nothing for me, so that's why it's mediocre. Any words on Thor: The Dark World, Scotty boy?
I watched it when it first came out. I don't remember anything about it.
Some background to this movie. I joke about it with a friend of mine who only saw it once in theaters back when he was like a younger teenager, and he really enjoyed the movie. So we joked that it's his favorite movie. And speaking of someone who considers Thor: The Dark World to be the best Marvel movie, my brother is a tutor, and he's tutoring this like third grader. And he asked, "Oh, my brother Brandon's watching all the Marvel movies. What's your favorite?" And he goes, "Um, either Ant-Man or Thor: The Dark World." And like Justin, he literally couldn't respond. He was actually in shock. So I said, Justin, next time you talk to him, you need to ask, when you said Thor the Dark World, do you mean when he fights the Incredible Hulk or when he fights the elf? Because I do not believe, I don't know why a kid could enjoy Thor the Dark World over the movie where Thor fights the Hulk.
Maybe
I
that
don't
was
know.
the only Marvel movie he saw besides the other one. Maybe it was the
No,
only
he saw
one.
all of them.
He saw all of. Okay, I'm very
Anyway, let's.
confused. That's his
I was
favorite.
confused too, Scott. It's okay.
Now I
I, I,
know.
I don't know. It's disturbing.
I know on your official list you put Iron Man 2 as the second worst.
That would you have an astonishing memory.
I
You
do
do.
remember that.
Iron Man 2 is like a number 2 that you flush down, but it's a good kind of number 2 that comes out. It's one of those pleasant feelings where, although it is number 2, you're getting it out there. You had a lot of beans for lunch, and when the number 2 is out, man, was it an enjoyable number 2, but still
Awesome.
a number
Awesome
2
feces.
because Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2, the character Tony Stark, he doesn't really grow as a character. He grows in probably every movie he's in, besides Incredible Hulk and the after credit scene he was in, and also in this movie. He experiences the thought of dying because of the shrapnel in his chest, so he kind of gets drunk in the movie and he pees in his suit, and it goes nowhere with his character, but there's still some very great character moments, some great acting from Robert Downey Jr., which we love him, and a nice little fight scene at the end with him and War Machine. And the villain's kind of funny. It's Whiplash. He goes, "Where
Yeah,
is my bird?
he has the
Where
two
is my
electric
bird?"
whips. I remember that. I don't
Yeah,
remember this movie very well.
no one does.
I just know that Iron Man 3 had some really awesome fight scenes at the end with all the suits.
Well, that's placed much higher than Iron Man
Right.
2. We're not even there yet. And by the way, just to put it out there, we're gonna spoil probably every Marvel movie, all 23 movies. So if you haven't
Right.
seen any one, or if you care enough, please step away from this video or this podcast. It's okay. Anyway, Scott, I want to continue on to the next movie that is on the decent list, where it doesn't really do anything to be considered genuinely really good, but it's still a decent watch. And that is a movie you haven't seen, the Not So Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, I can't say anything about this movie.
They really compensated by calling it incredible.
Now, what would you say about it that makes it mediocre or not on
Well, I
par
would
with the
just
rest of the
yawn into
movies?
the mic, and I would just yawn into the mic, and you'd get the point across.
Right.
But in all seriousness, the Incredible Hulk, it's a decent story where it's Bruce Banner who's already Hulk, and he's in this foreign place in, I don't know, Central America or in Brazil or something, and he goes back and he tries to get rid of the monster inside of him, but then he learns to use it for good at the end and fights Abomination. And the movie is definitely decent. It's a decent watch if you're in an airplane, but compared to every other Marvel movie after it, even Iron Man before it, it really do anything too special. I would say Iron Man 2 has more enjoyable moments than Incredible Hulk, but the Incredible Hulk is a better story and the character goes somewhere. So that's why it boosts up a little bit over Iron Man 2. But yeah, it's decent. It's okay. We're going to break away from mediocre and decent. We're going to go to what I consider to be a good, solid Marvel movie. Now, these movies are typically mostly origin stories, and they're very enjoyable popcorn movies, and you feel good after them, but they don't really do anything to be considered anything too deep. But they all have something good about them. And the first movie, which is the sort of the best of the worst, would be Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, this movie had the very hard thing of taking place after Avengers Infinity War, after that event of a film and the biggest cliffhanger of any film of all time. We go to a nice little movie where Paul Rudd is an idiot and he runs around in a little shrink suit. And that's kind of it. So to a lot of people that may be disappointing, but as a film, it still is enjoyable. It has a nice little chase sequence, little car chase sequence towards the end. The villain is decent enough, but it doesn't really do anything. It's not anything deep whatsoever, and the first movie is honestly a bit better. Captain Marvel ranks a little bit above Ant-Man and the Wasp. I do that because there's probably a little bit more in regards to character and story. Samuel L. Jackson as a young Nick Fury does a great job. It's a good sort of buddy cop sort of dynamic before cops were considered awful in the year 2020. But it's a good twist on the Skrull. We consider the Skrull to be villains in the comics, but in this movie there's a bit of a twist where they're just kind of refugees. And Captain Marvel is pretty cool. Not the most endearing Marvel character, but Brie Larson does a good enough job. Not the greatest film. Most films are better than it, but I thought it's good.
Yeah, this was, of all the Marvel movies that came out in 2019, which other ones came out? Spider-Man
and freaking Avengers Endgame. So
Endgame was 29. I thought it was 2018. Yeah, that's right.
It had the
So it had to live up to Endgame. It had to live up to Spider-Man.
To Infinity War. It couldn't. But you know what? As far as Marvel go, America and Iron Man, Ant-Man and the Wasp, I consider them good, but they have flaws to them. Are still good, but I don't consider them to be too flawed at all. And we're gonna move to little origin story where Thor has to learn to be more humble because in Asgard and he's selfish and his father Odin banishes him to be mortal to kind of learn his lesson, and we get introduced to Loki, who's one of the best villains. And it's a nice little story where Thor has to become a better man. And that's something that's great about Marvel as a company, showing these larger than life heroes and making them sort of human, even if they're godly.
You remember the scene in Thor when he walks into the pet shop and he just goes, "I need a horse."
He's like, "Which animal can I ride?" And they go, "It's just like, oh." Yeah, it's a good time all around. It's a good time.
It was a pretty good movie from what I remember.
You enjoyed the movie? Yeah, so definitely good.
He had a nice girlfriend going on, nice love interest. You know, it was a decent film.
It was an innocent time before Thor: The Dark World. I'll say that much. So the next film, a little bit above that, is the first Ant-Man. I thought this movie was good because you get to see sort of the main character, Scott Lang, really sort of overcome things and really try to be with his daughter, but realize that he's kind of a thief. And it's a good little story, a good origin story where he becomes Ant-Man, and I like what they do. Edgar Wright, a lot of his visuals and his visual flair, and it's really cool when he shrinks down and everything, and it's a very enjoyable movie.
When I think about this film, I think about how perfect Paul Rudd plays the role of Ant-Man. Like, I can't see any other actor portraying Ant-Man because Paul Rudd is just so good at playing characters that are down on their luck and just mean well, and you know they're
there's a lot of charm to him.
There's a lot of charm, and
there's definitely a lot of charm.
And the scene where he enlarged the Thomas the Tank Engine toy, that was one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. So.
It will forever live in meme culture, and Paul Rudd, we salute you.
We salute you,
even
Paul.
though you can't see us because you're so gosh darn tiny right now. But thank you, Paul Rudd, for being Paul Rudd. All right, so the next film is another very solid origin story, and this is the last movie where I consider is just a good, solid Marvel movie, and that is America, the First Avenger.
Right. This is a very good movie, honestly.
It is. It's very good. Captain America was definitely my favorite Avenger for the original Avengers lineup. He has so much heart, even before he was super big and strong, and it's something anyone could really relate to. He was just a good person that wanted to stand up against bullies who were Nazis, and I was raised Jewish. I want to punch a Nazi too, so I salute you there, Cap, and it's very enjoyable. It's cool seeing a World War II piece in sort of this Marvel lineup where the people go to space and everything. It's good to have this grounded World War II story, to have some enjoyable characters, and it's just a good movie and a good introduction to one of the best characters in the entire franchise.
When he fights Red Skull, at the end of the movie when he's unfrozen and he wakes up in modern times with Nick Fury. I believe Nick Fury was in that scene, right?
At the very end, that's probably one of the best moments. And he goes, "Cap, you've been under the ice for something amount of years." And he goes, and he's like, "How do you feel? How do you feel, Cap?" And he goes, "Not too great. I was about to dance with a girl, go on a date, and that just never really happened until much later in the franchise." But we'll get to that. So, yeah, Captain America, good movie. Really enjoyed it. Now, this is where we go to, I would consider really good, where it's still good, but it offers a little something more in regards to
He's
heart
down
and
here.
story that ranks these movies just a little bit above. And I consider the worst of the really good, which is still really good, to be Avengers Age of Ultron.
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 There were some really, really cool
We
fight
love
scenes
Ultron,
in this
literally
movie.
like a robotic comedian. Ultron, I know he's a villain. I know he massacres people, but if he literally had a stand-up set somewhere, I would risk my life and go to it because that dude's hilarious. The movie doesn't really have the staying power of any of the other three Avengers movies that came before and after it, but it still did a good job expanding the relationships and setting up things like Captain America Civil War. And sometimes it gets a little messy with Thor leaving the movie to tease other movies, like that kind of broke it. But it still had that charm, that dialogue, those character dynamics that are very charming that are put on with Joss Whedon. So I do think it's a very enjoyable movie, and it had a lot of heart. So I do consider it to be the worst of the really good. If that makes any sense to you?
Well, it definitely is the weakest of the three Avengers movies, but it's still there's a lot of things to like about Age of Ultron. You know,
There is a lot to like.
the comedic when hammer scene when they're trying to pick up the hammer, you know,
And
before the
that
fight.
that does get touched upon later in the franchise. So the movie does have a place, although it doesn't seem as impactful. Trust me, it without this film, you wouldn't have better films later on. Appreciate Age of Ultron. It was a good age, except the genocide thing, Ultron. You got to cut that out. But anyway, someone that is still around is Doctor Strange, which brings me to the next film on the list, Doctor Strange. I really do enjoy this film. While I do consider this a basic origin story, I think it does have a lot of heart. You have this Tony Stark-like surgeon who's very vain and full of himself, and he gets brought down due to a tragic accident, and he has to learn through the powers of magic and meditation to be define purpose and be a better man as a result. So it is kind of like a mystical Iron Man story. And the thing that I really like about it is visually, it is so awesome. I don't know why other movies don't have people fighting on the side of buildings. It's just so cool.
This was the
It
trippiest
is.
Marvel movie by far.
Exactly.
And
And I thought it was a very good story. Benedict Cumberbatch, I'm a Cumber bitch, as they say. And it's just a really good story. And
what
although it's basic, it does a lot.
this I love the origin of Doctor Strange. He's a surgeon. He's like a master surgeon, and then he gets in the car accident. He hurts his whole body, but specifically his hands, and he can't. And he just goes insane, and he moves all the way around the world. I think to Hong Kong, and he just learns like, oh, it's just such a honestly a very
Epic.
great
Yeah.
movie.
Simply epic. The thing about Doctor Strange is he never fully recovers from his quivering hands. So it's always funny. Like you'll see him with the Avengers, he's just randomly doing jazz hands because they're just shaking. This awesome franchise started out with a very awesome film. And that brings me to what I consider number 13, a really good movie in the franchise, the first Iron Man. If you're going to start any franchise up, you got to start up with a really endearing character. And Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark, Iron Man, definitely delivers. Just like Doctor Strange, after him, is a very vain person who didn't really care much about anyone but himself. But when he goes through a traumatic accident, wow, this is really similar to Doctor Strange, he learns to be an awesome superhero and a better man, making this awesome suit and fighting the bad dudes and kind of changing his company, which he realizes has been militarized, and becomes the iconic Iron Man, who was like a D-tier Marvel character who I never cared for before this film, and became super iconic amongst the ranks of Spider-Man and X-Men, Superman.
This was the first. Obviously, it's the first one of the first Marvel movies, but this was the first Marvel movie I'd ever seen. I was like 11,
Oh,
and this
really?
movie blew my mind.
Excuse the sound of the clock in the background here. I hope it's enjoyable. It's a very pleasant tune. But anyway, back to the film. It's very gritty. Like you have like I mean after this you're gonna have space and magic and everything. It's just a very it seems more realistic compared to a lot of the other Marvel movies, which I do enjoy. It was definitely a simpler time for these movies and gave you just a really solid, well-made film with a lot of heart. So it definitely is, I consider it to be really good and one of the better Marvel movies for sure, hands down.
I'm glad it started off with Iron Man.
And for me personally, Scott, there's only one Iron Man film that could come slightly above it. That brings us to our next film, and this is a very controversial hot take, but hear me out. I consider Iron Man 3 to just be a little bit better than Iron Man. Just a little bit. I know it probably has more flaws. Some people don't like the Iron Man twist, or it's kind of silly how Ultron Killian becomes the villain because he comes from this Riddler villain, nerdy guy to a super villain, and that could be really cheesy. But what it does right, I think it really does right. This takes place after Avengers, and Tony Stark has to cope with that, and he has all these panic attacks. And it's a very good personal story where there's not really Iron Man too much in the film. It's more Tony Stark learning to be a better person. So this should have happened in Iron Man 2, but there was really no growth. But Iron Man 3 is where you get a lot of growth from the character and a lot of significance. And although it's not super cosmic, it's not super exciting all the time, it definitely has a lot of heart to it for a character who has not really a heart but a thing in his chest.
No heart, but it doesn't mean he doesn't have sympathy and emotion and
Or
depth.
or not really a functioning heart. That's
Yeah,
what I meant.
right.
But it also does have some like really great action scenes. Some of the best for Iron Man. Number one, you have when the Mandalorian, the Mandarin and his crew are blowing up his house. That's awesome, and he saves Pepper. That was really cool. The scene where he's saving people from jumping out of the plane. That's super memorable. And of course, the ending scene by like the hangar or whatever, and Rhodey's there, and he has to save the president. And there's all these different suits coming together to fight the villain. I think that was really awesome. One of the better Iron Man fights, and because of all that, I do consider it just a little bit better than the first Iron Man. Just a little bit.
Very, very great fight scenes. I haven't seen this movie in a while, but I just remember,
I do recommend you go back to it.
yeah.
And
Well,
speaking of really, really great, we can't talk about Iron Man without talking about his prodigy, his apprentice, Iron Boy Jr. That's what a lot of critiques and criticizers call Spider-Man in the MCU. But you can't have Iron Man now without Spider-Man, and that's how Spider-Man goes a little bit above Iron Man in my personal list with Spider-Man Homecoming.
right.
Now, Spider-Man Homecoming, I would probably consider Iron Man to maybe be slightly better than the Spider-Man movies as filmmaking goes, but I have a Spider-Man hard on, and I'm not going to deny it. I've been taking Spider-Man Viagra pills for my entire life, so I just love Spider-Man, and I love how the MCU fit in Spider-Man. People will complain that he's trying too much to be Tony Stark, but in regards to the universe and filmmaking goes, they did a good job establishing this character organically in Captain America: Civil War and expanding his character. The Homecoming feels a lot like a high school music, not high school musical, God no, like a high school movie with a sort of superhero twist, and you really get that struggle of him trying to be a superhero but have a life and get the girl, and it's super hard, and that's the character of Spider-Man in the first place, and it really helps when you have one of the best villains in the entire MCU, Michael Keaton as the Vulture, who is a very down-to-earth, hardworking man, and you sort of get his struggles on why he's trying to steal from the Avengers, and he wants to look out for the little guy, and it's an interesting dynamic because that's what Spider-Man does. So I thought it was cool. What's your opinion on Spider-Man: Homecoming, my boy?
I thought it was a very good movie. I mean, I really like the scenes where Tony Stark is kind of playing this parent figure with Peter
Right.
Parker. It's very heartwarming to see, and I like Happy as a character. They're
It
it's
makes
just
you
like
happy.
essentially. I mean, like it's cool to see that he has mentors, and they're annoyed with him, but at the same time, they really just want to see him
Right.
succeed.
Tony was really rooting for him.
exactly. And
It was
also
a better Iron Man movie than Iron Man 2.
Aunt
I'm
May,
just gonna say.
Aunt May in this movie is a lot more attractive than Aunt May in the Sam Raimi trilogy.
No, no disrespect to her. She's great,
No,
but
she was
I
a
don't want to
great,
bang
great
her.
lady, but Aunt May, like, wow, I was not expecting her
Well,
to look.
that's kind of the joke, and it's
You're
a
right.
very enjoyable, different take on the Spider-Man ethos and lore, and it's a better Iron Man movie than Iron Man 2, and it does a lot of good. And the Vulture's amazing, so that's why it's placed so high on the list. And I'm on a Spider-Man roll here. You know, they just announced Spider-Man Miles Morales, the new Spider-Man game for the PS5, so I'm hyped, and I definitely want to talk more about Spider-Man, Scott. And speaking of, let's talk about the next film that ranks slightly above Homecoming, Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, I'll be honest with
We
you,
saw
I
this
do think,
together.
metaphorically, we were watching the film, and I do consider Homecoming to be a better made film, but there are some things from Far From Home that personally touch me a little more. I really like the dynamic of his trip, him going on trip with his class, and going to all these different places. It made me very nostalgic for when I went to Israel on Birthright, and we traveled all around. Again, this is very personal. I did really enjoy Mysterio and the nice twist there, even though I'm a comic fan, and I knew Mysterio was a bad guy all along. And it was a good sort of takeaway from what happened to Spider-Man after Endgame, after Tony Stark, his mentor, passes away. And I think he really becomes a better character at the end of this film. And Homecoming I really enjoyed, but I didn't think the action was too great. And the action and the Mysterio scenes and the illusion scenes were a lot more visually interesting than anything from Homecoming. So although Homecoming I consider a little bit better, personally I do prefer Far From Home just a little bit.
The end of this movie, very, very one of the best cliffhangers of any Marvel
One of the
movie.
best cliffhangers or after credit scenes ever put in a Marvel movie. So that definitely brings it up a notch.
Yeah, that
Now,
scores it some
Scott,
points.
we talked about the good, we talked about the really good, but what about the films I truly consider great? Movies that left a very permanent impact that will always stay with me, that I think really went above and beyond in regards to most other Marvel films. And the first movie I want to talk about that blew my mind when I first saw it was the first Avengers film that came out in 2012, directed by Joss Whedon. Now, this film was unprecedented. We never had a universe with all different characters who had different franchises. You know, Iron Man was more tech, Thor was more mythical and sort of Lord of the Rings kind of esque in a way, and Captain America was more war oriented, and Hulk was a monster movie, and you put all of these very different characters together and make them fit, and you get interesting dynamics and some of the best moments, character moments, and fight scenes in any of the Marvel movies since or prior. It was just an event for its time, and although I don't think it has aged as well as some other Marvel movies, I think it will permanently have a place in film history. Loki was an incredible villain. It has some of the best character moments, and if Marvel can do anything right, it's having great moments and great characters. So because of all that and some great memorable fight scenes, I do consider it truly great.
What can I say that hasn't already been said about this film? I mean, this is generation defining. I saw this movie like 8 times when it first came out, something crazy like
Me too,
that.
buddy. Me too.
I saw this movie over and over and over again in theaters. This is one of the best movies, honestly, I've ever seen. And it's just,
Right.
especially when I'm 15 watching this, watching for the, like you say, for the first time in
That was
pretty
mind
much
blowing.
film history.
It broke my expectations on what a movie can be, and it shattered my world. And after that, I always liked the Marvel movies, but after that, I became a lifelong diehard fan. And that's what Avengers did, and I'm forever grateful. And if you could believe it, there are 8 other movies I consider to be better.
But before
Believe it
we
or
go
not.
on, this is the first movie, the first Avengers, where we saw Thanos. So I just want to put that out there. So that it
we
gets a
love
lot of points
we
for
love
that.
that big purple guy. We love him. Anyway, something I love a little bit more than Avengers, believe it or not, is the third Thor movie, Thor Ragnarok.
This movie is
Now,
awesome. This is one of my
It
favorite
is
Marvel movies.
insane. It is wild. You get Taika
Hilarious.
Waititi to resurrect a franchise that was flushed down the toilet with Thor: The Dark World, and he put so much life into it, bringing sort of that cosmic feel that you may get in Guardians of the Galaxy, and some typical humor that he sprinkles on and charm that you would know the director for, and you get introduced to some great characters like Korg and Meek, who are hilarious, some great character moments with Loki, and you have what's her name?
Yeah.
Valkyrie,
Yeah.
she's really great, and Hulk is awesome, and Bruce Banner, and you put all that together, and you get one of the most wild, out there movies. But you have to respect it for being so bold. There are so many crazy things that happen in this movie,
This is one of
like
the
Jeff
most
Goldblum, like
aesthetically
a giant
pleasing
wolf.
movies.
Yeah, it's just so awesome. It is just pure fun and awesomeness. It's not a deep movie by any means, but as far as just pure Marvel fun goes, it's one of the best, easily.
It is so comedic. It's just so lively and bombastic, and it doesn't take itself seriously at all, like the Dark World.
It's the nonsense we enjoy at Nonsense News Nation. I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely.
Now, on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, we have a bit more of a serious film that comes a little bit higher on the ranking for me, and that is Captain America: Winter Soldier.
Very
Now,
serious
before
film.
this, you would consider all these films comic book movies. For me, this is like the Dark Knight of the MCU, where it takes itself a lot more seriously. It's a grittier film, and it's like an espionage movie with a hint of superhero stuff mixed in between. You get a lot of character growth with Captain America, who learns that to not blindly go for his government, sometimes there are flaws, and he truly stands for what he believes is right. There's a great twist with Bucky Barnes, his old friend from World War II, being the Winter Soldier, and he has to go through that dynamic. You get introduced to Sam Falcon, who is a great character, and they have a great dynamic themselves. And Black Widow, we love her, and she really shines in this film. Samuel Jackson's in it too. You have a great villain with, oh, is it Mr. Pierce? And it's a very smart, intelligent film with a lot of heart to it as well. So that's why it's ranked so high for me. Oh, and the fight scenes are great, and they're very visceral.
Oh, they're perfect. This is definitely deserves the great tagline.
Oh, for sure. It truly is great.
Speaking
Now,
of great,
speaking of great, we're continuing with the great trend. I'm feeling great today. And Captain America is great. So a film that I thought was maybe a little bit greater just for my personal preference is Captain America Civil War. Just like Homecoming versus Far From Home, I think that Winter Soldier may be a little bit better of constructed as a movie, but it takes the grit from the Winter Soldier and the fun character dynamics from Avengers, and you fuse that all together, and you just get a very well meaty Marvel movie with a lot of character, where Captain America questions what's right with his government, or wrong in this case, with the Accords, it's Sokovia Accords, and you
right?
get a lot with Iron Man, and you see both sides. It's not just so black and white, which is so great about this film.
This movie is one of the most thought-provoking Marvel movies. I mean, most of the Marvel movies aren't very thought-provoking. They're just fun, action movies. But
Right.
this makes you think about, well, you kind of agree with Iron Man sometimes that maybe it would be best if, there were some restrictions with what the Avengers did.
To the superhero life, yeah.
And then
And
sometimes you agree with Captain America because, those restrictions
I
have
mean, it's his
consequences
movie.
too.
Come on, you have to agree with him every now and then. But anyway, you have like a really fun, one of the best sequence in all of Marvel, the airport scene where you have all these different superheroes fighting each other. You get introduced to Black Panther and Spider-Man, some of the MCU's best characters, and the ending fight where Tony Stark loses it with Bucky and Captain America's fighting. It's super heartfelt and it's soul crushing to see these Avengers, these
Right.
friends, fight each other.
That
And
was a
it's
hard
just so
scene to
personal.
watch.
It is, but pretty awesome nonetheless.
We only have 5 movies left, and I'll say that Civil
So
War
we are
was
in our
my
top
favorite.
five.
My Civil War was my favorite until a certain movie came out.
Right. And I'm not sure this movie is your favorite film, but you've definitely grown to really like it, Scott. And number five for me is Black Panther. Now, for me, it doesn't have the best action sequences. The final fight kind of sucked with Black Panther and Killmonger. But as far as stories go, I think it's just an instant classic. It speaks a lot about a racial divide. It's sort of like that classic Martin Luther King, Malcolm X debate that is brought up. And it's like a modern day Lion King in a sense. And
That is a lot like
it
Lion King.
brings the empowering, yeah, these two cats fighting for power. A little too, it's made by Disney. It's a little too much at this point, but it brings this world Wakanda. It's very empowering. It's a very good sort of story with a great world and great characters like Shuri, like Okoye, M'Baku. These really memorable moments in film. And while again, I can't say it's the most heart pumping action packed films. It has such a great story and one of the best villains. Killmonger, he's clearly the villain, but you really feel for him and understand why he thinks the way he does and does what he does. So for that, for just having such a great groundbreaking story and having that impact that it did, that and it really spoke to our generation for a lot of different reasons. You can't deny Black Panther's greatness. Wakanda Forever. It's number 5 on my list. Okay, the next film that blew my mind in theaters and is one of my favorites is the first Guardians of the Galaxy film. It offers such the other films are a lot more grounded. This is pretty much a space comedy, and Avengers took multiple films to have these characters set up. For Guardians of the Galaxy, it was the span of one film, and you fell in love with these characters, and you cried when the talking raccoon cried. And the score is amazing. The soundtrack is incredible. Visually, it's so appealing, and the characters work so well off of each other. And they're some of the best characters really put into the entire franchise. And there's so much heart and warmth to the point where I really consider this to be the Star Wars of our generation.
This feels more
Forget
like
the new Star Wars
Spaceballs.
movies.
This feels more like Spaceballs than Star Wars. It's more
Well, this
goofy.
movie had balls, and it just happened to be in space. Okay,
Drax is one of
it's
the
a great
funniest
movie.
characters in the whole MCU.
So it's
Drax.
truly a wonderful movie, and I cannot wait for Guardians 3.
But
It truly is
before we
great.
get to Guardians 3, we have to get to
Let's go to
Guardians.
Guardians 2. Yeah, I rank this just a little bit above, just like Homecoming and Far From Home, and just like Iron Man and Iron Man 3. I do think Guardians is a better structured movie. Like sometimes it feels like you're just watching a sitcom with Guardians 2, but you enjoy the characters so much. I think the music is a little bit better. It has some of the best moments in the entire franchise with Yondu, with Rocket, with Star-Lord. The villain is great, Ego, Star-Lord's dad. And the thing that ranks it above Guardians is it has so much heart and emotions. And it says a lot about choosing your family and friendship versus family. And the sacrifice of Yondu was so heartfelt. And it's just so sweet at the end. You end up having a nice tear in your eye. And you really enjoyed this dynamic. And it proves that Marvel movies don't have to be so soulless. They don't have to be what Martin Scorsese says. It can have a lot of heart. You can cry with their talking raccoon. It's okay.
I don't
I'll
remember
rock it.
anything about this movie, really. I saw it when I first came out. I don't know. I wasn't super into Guardians 2. I can't tell you why. I didn't hate it. I didn't
It's
love it.
it's not for everyone, Scott. It's a film that's not for everyone, but I'd say give it a chance and
I'll watch
let
it
the
again.
emotions overtake you.
I watched
Yeah,
Guardians 1 again like last year, and Guardians 1 was still like so good. It's definitely my.
it's so great. Yeah.
All right,
But
but
it still has the heart that James Gunn put in, and it's a great movie, although it's not structured as well as the first Guardians.
have you noticed that the best movies have the best posters?
They do. And the movie with the best poster, we're going straight up to godly now. We're done with great. The two films are just absolutely godly, and that is Avengers Infinity War. Easily the best poster with just the amount of heroes. And we got our big purple boy Thanos. Front and center. We love him, Scott. Now. We love him dearly.
This is my favorite Marvel movie by far. This movie, I want to take the mic here, Brandon.
Go
This
ahead.
movie
Go right
does
ahead.
pretty much everything right and so well. Thanos is an excellent villain. He's portrayed well. He has great motivation. The all of your favorite characters have great screen time in this movie, and they each get their due. And at the ending is so perfect. They went through with
It's soul punching.
it's soul crushing. It's a great, it moves you. The ending will move you like no other Marvel ending will. And I
Right.
cannot say enough good things about this movie.
So we spoke about the first Avengers breaking ground, and the cinema dynamic would never be the same. Age of Ultron came out about, I don't know, 3 years later, and it was good. It was decent, but it didn't really have the event impact that the first Avengers did, and we thought it wouldn't be replicated ever again. Avengers was lightning in a bottle. It never happened again. Then Infinity War came out and threw in so many different characters and different franchises. You have the normal Avengers, but you have Doctor Strange. You're bringing in magic. Guardians of the Galaxy, which is pretty much Spaceballs, and you're bringing all these different franchises. Black Panther with Wakanda, Spider-Man. This shouldn't work. This really shouldn't work. There are way too many characters, way too many subplots and things happening. But my God, it is beautifully handled, and that is really helped with how sympathetic Thanos is as a villain. And some of the best action scenes in all of the franchise are in this film. It is the best event of any of these movies, and the ending is something no fan of movies will ever forget. And it is a brilliant film, and it still holds up. 2 years later, I highly recommend it. It is such a well-earned film that it's just so great. And then after it, Ant-Man and the Wasp happened, and it was just a cute little movie. Then Captain Marvel happened, and it was just a cute little movie. And then Scott, we get to my personal number one, a film where people didn't know if it will hold up well after Infinity War's greatness. But not only did it do that, it gave the best send-off to the franchise prior in the best way possible. And for me, it ranks a little bit above Infinity War. That is Avengers Endgame came out in 2019, and it takes place after the devastation and decimation that happened at the end of Infinity War. And so you get a lot of this very serious emotion and characters just being characters and dealing with it. And that in itself is soul crushing. You get probably the most emotion you've gotten any other Marvel film prior and after, and it's great. The film goes to me in 3 acts. You have the first act where it's post snap, post Thanos' snap, and the characters are struggling to deal with it. Part two, which is the awesome fan service and time travel that you get. And then part three, which is the most epic moment in all of Marvel ever, that final fight with the 2014 Thanos. You get Captain America wielding Mjolnir, which is one of the most awesome moments. Thor has Mjolnir and Stormbreaker together. They're working with Iron Man, and then the portal sequence. That's all I have to say. If you're a Marvel fan, you know it. All the Avengers come back to life. They're all there, and they all have this super insane fight sequence. Which the only fight sequence I think might be a little bit better for me is the Titan fight scene in Infinity War, but it's super epic. Black Widow's sacrifice will still make me cry, and that Tony Stark's sacrifice, I blubber like an idiot every single time. And
I
the
am
funeral
inevitable.
sequence
I am
and the
Iron
thing
Man.
with his daughter, it has so much heart, Scott. And because of that, I think it's a slightly better story than Infinity War. Still has some great moments, and as a Marvel fan, everything is paid off so well. And for me, that's why Endgame is the best film. I think it's a classic film, and it only came out a year ago. I think this will stand the test of time. People will remember this event. They'll remember this franchise fondly and how it was paid off so perfectly in this film. We saw this opening night together, and I will never forget it.
That was a
There was
great
never a
memory.
movie that could take its place. Infinity War was close, but there is nothing like Endgame, and that's why it is number one for me.
Thank you so much for watching, everybody. and listening in.
or listening. I don't know what you did. We
We,
hope you enjoyed. I sure did. It's great reminiscing with Marvel with you, buddy.
of course, anything, anything for you.
And
That
anything
is,
for you, for those listening and watching. If you want to hear more of us, I really hope you do. We're on Spotify, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Anchor, SoundCloud, and YouTube. We have a Facebook, a Twitter, and an Instagram where we make some funny posts sometimes. We even have a website, nonsensenewsnation.com. And if you want to contact us personally and give us your ranking of Marvel films, and I want to listen to it and hear it, unless Thor the Dark World is number one, then I don't, you can contact us at nonsensenewsradio@gmail.com. That is nonsensenewsradio@gmail.com. Once again, I've been Brandon Ellis.
I have been Marvel Scott Honickman.
And this has been a marvelous podcast. Totally nonsense on Nonsense News Nation. We'll see you next time.